So I've been working in this field for about 15 years, and one of the most common things I've encountered that I would like to talk about today, that we need to turn around, is the concept of sin. What it is, what people think it is, what it actually is, and how we can use it in a more intelligent way. Generally, people think of sin as a behavioral thing, when you do something bad, right? If you steal something or use drugs or, and you hurt people, that's bad because it's physical stuff, and I'm not going to debate that. But it's not really the intention behind that word. And when you understand what sin really is, we can unify and not argue so much, because we got a lot of problems going on in this world, and it's because we argue over things like what sin is. So we're going to clarify what sin is today in ways that I think is pretty clear, and then talk about a few examples at the end of this. So the best way to start by thinking about it, what sin is there's really just two ways looking at the world. We all look at the world in two ways. We only really focus on one of them usually, and that's the physical world. Also, we can call it the flesh world. This is the world of stuff. Stuff you could see, stuff you could smell, stuff you could scratch and kick and lick and whatever. If you can do anything with it physically, it's physical stuff. That's the world of bodies. We've all got them. It's a world of money. We argue about that all the time. This is the world of race, skin color. We have gender. We have sexual orientation. These are physical things that we do with each other, right? These are all labels. If we're going to label it physically speaking, this is eventually going to separate us somehow. This is why we're arguing so much about all these issues, okay? It's by definition, if we're going to be arguing or talking over here in the physical world, we're going to have some arguments over it. That's one way of looking at the world. Another way, which is much more unifying, is looking at the world non-physically or spiritually. This also exists. You just can't see it. It's the world of souls, if you will. It's the energy of who we really are. Consciousness, if that word works better for you. There's a world that exists. It's an energy world. We all know energy exists. Einstein said everything is energy, right? So you could argue that none of this actually even exists. It's an energy world that we're living in. This is the world that includes stuff like forgiveness and hope, or fruits of the Spirit. We all know that exists, right? Even though you can't see it, forgiveness exists, hope exists. That world exists too. And so we got two worlds. This is a world of flesh, and we argue about this stuff all the time. It separates us. This is the world of ego. This other world is the spiritual world, which unites us. It brings us together. Everybody would agree on the spiritual world stuff that concepts like forgiveness always beat experiences like resentment. Hope always feels better than hopelessness. Should we debate what the right body is, or who should get the money, or what should we do with taxes? This is why we argue. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying this is why we argue. Racial differences in gender and sexual orientation, who gets to have sex with who, stuff like that. This is a big deal. It's really important to some people. We're going to argue. This is the world of spirit. Really no argument over here. I'm not putting religion over here, because we argue about that all the time too, because we focus on it physically, okay? If we're going to keep it to spiritual things, non-physical things, we're not going to be arguing. We're going to be uniting pretty quickly. So with that as the setup, what is sin? The Bible was originally written in Hebrew. And where it says sin in the Bible that you would read, where it says sin, in Hebrew it says chata. The Hebrew Bible got translated into Greek. And the word sin, which is shata in Hebrew, becomes hamartia in Greek. When it gets translated into English, now we see the word sin. And we think that's referring to physical world stuff. That's what we think. It's how we get taught it. Well, these words are actually archery terms. And the word means to miss the mark. You're aiming at a bullseye, and if you don't hit the bullseye, you miss the mark. This word in particular, in Hebrew, the concept is to miss the gold in the center. To miss the gold in the center. Well, sinning is when you miss the mark because you're aiming wrong, right? If I'm trying to hit a bullseye, but I'm not aiming at it correctly, I won't get to hit the bullseye. We are looking at it wrong. You're aiming badly. Well, sinning is when you look at the world this way. When you judge people physically, that's sinning. We're looking at the world and making assumptions about people left and right, judging all the time. That is sinning. To look at the world correctly is to look at the world as it actually is. It's the spiritual world. We sin when we look at the world physically. We don't sin when we look at the world spiritually. So now when they say Jesus was sinless, What does that mean? Jesus looked at the world spiritually. That's it. I mean, you could say whatever you want about what he might have done in the physical world. He never talked about it. He emphasized the spiritual world. How did he emphasize it? Well, in stuff like John 6:63, where he says the Spirit gives life and the flesh counts for nothing. Why are we debating what we should be doing in the flesh if the flesh counts for nothing? He didn't talk about physical behaviors like that. He talked about spiritual behaviors. And if he did say something that sounded physical, he's actually talking about spirit. Good example being, let's be fishers of men. When he says that to Peter, we're actually supposed to go out there with hooks and bait and try to get people and reel them in. And that's a spiritual thing, obviously. He was sinless because he always looked at the world spiritually, which is what we're supposed to be doing. John 7:24 is when he says, judge not by mere appearances, judge correctly. Well, mere appearances is here. We judge by mere appearances all the time when we assume we know what's going on for a person because of what's happening to them in the flesh. To judge correctly is to look at the person the way we need to be assessing each other. How forgiving are you? How hopeful are you? How courageous are you? How connected to the Spirit are you? See, doing unto others as you'd have them do unto you, that's what I want you guys to do with me. Help me be forgiving and hopeful. Help me work on the fruits of the Spirit. And I'll help you do that. There's no judgment there. That's actually proper judgment. Let's work on spirituality together. And that feels nothing but good, and it's nothing but uniting. In the flesh world, that's mere appearances. Now we're going to judge and argue and debate. It's the world of ego. Of course we're going to squabble about that. And last, in Romans 6:23, where he says, the wages of sin is death. The wages of sin is death. Well, what would that mean? And how does that usually get interpreted? Well, if you do something bad, according to that guy who's standing over there telling you what this really means, that you shouldn't do this or that, if you don't go to church on Sundays at the right time, or you don't give the right amount of money, or if you have sex with the wrong person, or if you do anything bad ever, you're going to die because of it. Now you're going to hell. Well, good. You just looked at it physically. But the wages of sin is death actually means if you look at yourself wrong, see, you're a soul. A child of God is a soul. And if you look at yourself as a body, that this is what was important to God, if that's what you do, you're sinning and you'll die. Because if I think I'm Steve, physical dude, guess what happens when my death comes? Oh no, I'm dying. Well, didn't Jesus overcome death? How? He knew he wasn't this. He knew he wasn't a physical body. He knew he was a spiritual body. He knew he was an eternal soul. He wants you to understand that you're an eternal soul. None of us can die. And if you look at it the right way, nobody's ever died. Try that one, right? Nobody can hurt you spiritually. Okay, so let's use a couple examples so you can see how to practically apply this. Now, we could talk about politics for hours, maybe even get into some arguments. That would be fun. But if you look at it the right way, you wouldn't assume you know what is going on for the other person based upon what they're doing. Taxes is a great example of this, okay? I've talked to thousands of people in my career and what I do, and I've talked to people on the left and the right, and a lot of people have really strong opinions about that topic, okay? Should we raise taxes or lower taxes? Here's the thing. If you assume to know the intent of the other person based upon what they're doing, you're sinning. You're judging by mere appearances. I could easily argue both sides of the raising taxes, lowering taxes. I'm not going to do it for you. You can research that on your own. But for sure, there's valid points of view on both sides. One side will look at the other side and make a whole bunch of assumptions about their motives based upon what's happening physically. Well, can you, as the saying goes, give a man a fish and be compassionate? Can you teach a man to fish and be compassionate? Well, sure. Well, as the saying goes, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime, right? Logical, right? Well, what if you have a starving guy on the side of the road, he's about ready to die, and you in your infinite wisdom go up and say to him, I'm not going to give you a fish now, I'm going to teach you how to fish though, right? And then he dies in front of you. Did you really help him? And at the same time, if you say, here's a fish, tomorrow I'll come back and I'll give you another fish. And then you come back the next day, you give him another fish. And every day he's sitting there waiting for the fish. For the next, 25 years, he's just expecting you to give him a fish. What does he ever learn? Obviously, this can be spun either way if you're looking at it physically, right? What matters is the intention behind it. And who can read the intention? You know your intention, right? If I'm holding the door open for somebody so they can go in before me, that looks like it's a nice move, right? Isn't that very polite? But if I'm doing it so I could check them out, maybe not the right intention, right? We don't know why people are doing what they're doing. That's judging by mere appearances. It's not your business in that regard. The goal is to talk spiritually, okay? What's the intent? What's the motivation behind it? Now, if you like to argue, you can argue. That's fine. Have at it. You'll have that experience and you'll feel the stress. The lack of judgment that you can feel in your heart, though, is to say, all right, what is the intention behind what they're doing? And then we'll have a lot more commonality there. And we'll be more open-minded because we could see the intentions of others in more pure ways. Instead of arguing, which gets us in a stressful resistance separation position, we're going to find ourselves in a more unity position. So is there biblical backing for this? Well, of course. Ecclesiastes 3. We've all heard this. I'm just going to read it to you real quick, at least some of it. For everything there's a season, a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to kill, a time to heal. Cut that. I don't want to hear keel in there.
The birds, man.
Yeah, right. So is there biblical explanation for this? Sure there is. In Ecclesiastes 3, for everything there's a season, a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. That means there's a time to hug people, and there's a time not to hug people. There's a time to be silent, there's a time to speak. There's a time to love and a time to hate. There's a time for war and a time for peace. Why are we arguing about it all the time? What should we do here? It doesn't matter. What matters is, are you finding the Spirit in it? Whatever your experience is to look for the Spirit in it. There's a time for both of those things. That makes sense. I would say there's a time to give a man a fish. There's a time to teach a man a fish. There's a time to raise taxes. There's a time to lower taxes. The whole thing is a process until you get over here fully all the time. And when you always look at things spiritual, now you're sinless. And if we look at it and we argue about you should do this, you should do that, you're sinning. You want to feel the actual peace of Christ in your heart? Get over to this side and assess people correctly. Assess yourself correctly. It's not what you've done with your physical world. As Jesus said, I've done nothing but my Father who is in me. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you gained over here. History is filled with inspirational stories of people like Viktor Frankel in the book Man's Search for Meaning, who went through the Holocaust. And he found the meaning in it. He said at one point he wasn't sure if his wife was alive or dead, but he knew that his love for her transcended death. Wow, he looked at it spiritually instead of physically. Anything that you get through with adversity, like being nailed to a cross, you could look at it physically, but if you look at it spiritually, you just gained. That's what we're here to do as souls. We're here to gain spirit. We're here to grow in spirit. We're here to actually experience negative experiences, apparently negative experiences, and learn the Spirit in it. And now we are sinless.